Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Demystify Selling with Microsoft. And I'm joined today with someone I met recently at an RSA conference, Carley Salmon. So, Carley, welcome.
Hi, thanks, Rob, for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, you and I got to meet through a mutual friend, Vishal Amin. So, I was
Yes.
really excited to learn more and to get this opportunity to really deep dive with you because you focus on the security side of Microsoft, but specifically in the federal group, if I'm correct.
Yes. So I'm a security technical specialist. So basically working with our federal defense customers, which are kind of our military and Department of Defense customers, figuring out how to use our tools to solve their security problems and modernize and, further on their security journey.
Great. And if I'm not mistaken, that's a really large, I mean, it's definitely a large group that you're dealing with, but you're also dealing with a lot of other ecosystem partners. So the DIB, as it's referred to, the Defense Industrial Base, does that roll into your purview as well?
Yeah, so to an extent. So for me in defense, we used to have some of our defense contractors, the defense industrial base that you mentioned. So these are
Mhm.
all kind of industry commercial companies that have contracts and do work for the government. And prior to coming to Microsoft, I did a lot of work with those companies as a government employee, validating their compliance with their cybersecurity requirements for having government information. So because I did that before, we used to have some defense contractor customers kind of in our business unit. I still do the work in regards to the compliance for government for those customers, as well as even for our military and Department of Defense customers, because they care about their defense contractors' compliance as well. So
Right. So it's really a flow down from through your core customer to these other sort of third party institutions that are supporting the government.
exactly.
Great. Well, and so as part of your role then, are you involved with the partner community today in this new role that you're in at Microsoft?
Yeah, so I work with partners kind of in a few different areas. We work with partners from a deployment implementation standpoint. So, partners who do and help our customers implement the products that they purchase. When they don't have that Microsoft contract for support, we go to partners to help them do that. And we
Mhm.
also have, some of these larger organizations like the Army or the Air Force, they have system integrators and they have, companies like SAIC or
Mhm.
CACI that are pretty much staff augmentation. And so we kind of work with slash through those system integrators as well from that perspective. And then the work that I do with our defense contractors, which is kind of towards the cybersecurity maturity model certification, which is what now government or defense contractors will require in order to get a contract with the government. We have a lot of partners that help those customers meet those requirements, manage those requirements in order to get that certification that those defense contractors need. So I kind of work with a myriad of different partners through
Got it.
Microsoft.
Got it. Got it. And you alluded to something there that is relatively new in terms of sort of a rule that partners must apply or adhere to now, which is CMMC. So maybe you could take a minute and sort of demystify what CMMC is for us.
Yeah, so CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, is kind of the evolution of the government's cyber protection requirements of government information that they ask of these defense contractors. So if you're going to have government information called controlled unclassified information or CUI, for many years, there has been a clause in their contracts, the DFARS, I think it's like 252.204-7012, kind of just called the DFAR 7012 for short.
Mhm.
They've had that clause in their contract for many years, about like 2016, 17 timeframe. And what I used to do with the government is we used to go and validate that, which they started the validation process back in 2019. And there's thousands, like hundreds of thousands of defense contractors. And so
Yeah.
it is really a lot for a team to be able to go and be able to continuously validate these companies and their requirements. So the evolution of that is the CMMC certification, which would then have a third party assessment organization, a 3PAO, come in, evaluate the requirements. They get the certification. And so when you go to get your contract, you show that certification in order for that contract to continue going forth and you doing the work. So it's nothing really new. This rule and the certification is new in the sense that it is now live.
Yeah.
But the requirements of CMMC are all derived from the requirements of the NIST Special Publication 800 171, which is what were the requirements of the DFAR 7012. So the requirements haven't fully, the requirements necessarily haven't changed, just the validation certification process is changing.
And so now the partner community, if you want to, if I'm understanding you correctly, if you want to participate or bid on a government contract, this is a requirement, or this rule is something you have to take into consideration and have to meet the rules of CMMC now. Is that correct?
Yeah, so from a partner perspective, it really is going to be kind of what are you doing? What kind of information are you handling? How are you supporting these defense contractors? And so that really in the rule, that's all based under all of the definitions and requirements for an external service provider. And there's different kind of levels of that, right? You have managed service providers that can do your day-to-day IT work. Maybe they're just helping you get the documentation going. You also have managed security providers. And so those are basically like your SOC as a service.
Yeah.
So they're doing all of your defending and incident response. And so, depending on what these companies are doing for you, will depend on if they either have to be involved with the assessment that you go through. So, if you have a managed service provider, someone who is doing staff augmentation, they're doing your daily IT work, they might need to be a part, or even as an MSSP, they might have to be a part of your assessment. And if they are hosting any of that data on their systems potentially, or if they have a product that you are using, they might have to also have that CMMC level 2. It's not necessarily a requirement, but if they have that CMMC level 2 certification, it makes it kind of, in a sense, it could be easier for you to be using them through the assessment, and they won't necessarily need to be sitting there. We really won't fully know the extent of that involvement until they start going through these, until they start going through some assessments, and we're able to get more information. But we know that you can't not be involved. And as the defense contractor, you have to ensure that they are doing what the requirement requires of them. If they are kind of taking that ownership of the implementation or responsibility of that requirement, which is why if they have a CMMC level 2 certification themselves, you know that they're meeting that requirement for CMMC. If they don't have the certification, then you just have to make sure that you validate that what they are doing to implement that requirement meets what is going to be needed for the certification. And then another type of external service provider is like Microsoft, a cloud service provider, which we have to adhere to FedRAMP authorization. And so we have to be FedRAMP authorized in order for government information to be on any of our products, or any of our products to interact with CUI.
Okay. And just so if I'm hearing you correctly, then it's really a flow down really from the defense contractor to all the different providers that, if I'm providing services to a defense contractor and I have my CMMC level 2 certification, that's a good place to be. But if I don't, I can still potentially work with that defense contractor. Just we'll have to go through some, or some level of assessment, or the defense contractor will have an obligation to see what I'm doing with that service that I'm providing.
Correct. Yes. So it's all going to be about how you implement that requirement and that kind of shared responsibility, as far as what services you're providing. So then, for example, like access control, the contractor or the defense contractor who has that contract is always going to have some level of responsibility because they have to
Mhm.
create the list of who has access, they have to check that list. The technology of allowing or denying access, or if you are like a staff augmentation for this company, they will then authorize you access to the system, and then the technology does that allow block, but they have to then give you that access. So
Got it, got it. And then you touched on this, and I'd love to go a layer deeper, but you touched on Microsoft's involvement, and I've heard people, maybe right or wrong, talk about, oh well, if you're in GCC or GCC high, you're fine when it comes to these rules and regulations, and I'd love to hear from you if that's what that means, or if that is true or not true.
yeah, so Microsoft's platforms, right? So we have our
Mhm.
different cloud levels because they have different requirements. And so you've got commercial, you've got GCC, GCC high, and then you have the DoD environment. Nobody but the DoD can go into the DoD environment.
Right.
So as a defense contractor, you're going to be in one of the other three or a mix of the other three, and really depending on if you want to be in GCC or GCC high will determine the type of information that you have will determine which cloud you want to be in. And when I say which cloud, like GCC is going to be kind of that M365 environment, because then you also have your Azure environment, which there's Azure Commercial and Azure Government. Um, so if you have CUI Basic and it's not export controlled, you probably can get away with being in that GCC high environment, which is just that lower level, well, what I would say is the lower level cloud, right? Because it's all based upon the Department of Defense's cloud security requirements. And so there's different impact levels, and GCC is a lower impact level, meaning that the information is not as protect or not as serious, if you will.
Yeah.
And so that's going to determine which cloud you go in. If you have any type of CUI, you're not going to necessarily be able to be in that M365 commercial because our commercial instance does not have a FedRAMP package. And so if you do any work or have any information with the government, as a cloud service provider, we have to be FedRAMP authorized. And our GCC high environment, our Azure commercial are both FedRAMP authorized. GCC high and our Azure government are both authorized. GCC high is in the marketplace as pending. We are just waiting for that approval of the package, but it does meet that FedRAMP equivalent, which is you're either FedRAMP authorized or equivalent.
Yeah.
GCC high meets the equivalent requirements. Um, and so that's where you then, because of the requirements that the government has for their information, we have to have different development deployments of those environments. And so that's why the FedRAMP is how we validate that our systems are good to go for having government information. And so you can find out if your cloud service provider or SaaS solution, your software as a service solution,
Yeah.
is FedRAMP authorized via the FedRAMP marketplace. And that's the
Right.
easiest place. That's where assessors are going to go to check. So that's where you can go to check. And they can always also provide you that package, that body of evidence, if you will.
Got it. Got it. Sorry, was there something else you wanted to add there? Or?
No,
No?
it's a
Yeah.
lot. It's a lot of
Yeah.
information. I know it's a lot of words, but it's kind of complex. I always show, like, we have this chart that I don't know if it was Richard Wakeman who created it or derived it from different information, but it's like the simplest way of how everything kind of lines up. Um, and so just to that's kind of how I'm like talking through what that chart looks like in my head.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's great. That's super helpful. And I guess from my perspective, one of the things that I like to try and do in every one of my interviews here is to give partners, especially systems integrators or anybody that wants to sort of partner closer with Microsoft, what advice would you have for somebody that is considering either, thinking about bidding on contracts, government contracts, or thinking about supporting somebody that is a government contractor? What is the first thing or things that they should do to really start to think about if it's right for them to get into this business?
Sure. So, I mean, I guess it depends on what you're doing, right? If you have
Mhm.
a product that is built on Azure, that that you partner with Microsoft with, and you're in the ecosystem to kind of like sell. Um, the first question that I always ask is, are you FedRAMP authorized? Because being built on Microsoft gives you some of that leeway. But if it's a product, because we get reached out to by partners all the time, or they want to work with us more, but being in the federal space, I can't bring a product to my customer because you might fill a gap that we have. And that's the one thing with working in the federal space and that GCC high and DoD environments is that there's typically feature parity from our commercial offerings. Like, for example, we don't have Copilot in those higher clouds yet. We're working through getting those authorized. And so people who like come with something that can fill that gap, my first question is like, can it be used in the federal space?
Right.
And then from a people perspective, from a staff augmentation perspective, do you have cleared personnel? Because a lot of our customers either work in cleared spaces. You might not necessarily be doing cleared work, but you might be working in cleared spaces. And so even when I started out as a contractor, like it was a requirement for me to have a clearance. Um, and luckily, like I had one from when I was in the army, and it just kind of transferred over. So those are kind of some of the unfortunate barriers to entry. But like as a system integrator, um, one of the things, while we don't have the co-pilots and some of the great AI tools that Microsoft has developed available yet, we do have Azure OpenAI. And so
Mhm.
how can, you know, you create, or do you have something built with Azure OpenAI that can kind of fill that gap of, the lack of co-pilots, if you will, or, when we do get the co-pilots, it's not going to be, there still might be a little bit of parity between, all the different plugins that we have for security copilot and commercial. We may not have all of those plugins. And so how can you make what we already have better, that's going to
Right.
support, in federal, it's very mission focused. The
Mhm.
mission is the end users, protecting our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, guardians, um, and the systems that they're using. And so, how can you help us with that mission? Are the things that we look for, or how can you enhance what we do? Like with insider risk management, you know, we have a lot of signal that we bring in from the internal perspective, but there's a lot of different indicators from external, that there are many products out there that use. And so that's a great enhancement of our tool
Yeah.
that is, something that's desirable. But are you built on Azure, which then can get you kind of across that FedRAMP hump, if
Right.
you will. So those are kind of some of the things when I have conversations with partners. And yeah,
Yeah. So
the marketplace is a great place for, first off, for people looking for partners to work with or
mhm.
getting into the marketplace. That makes it a lot easier for us too. Um,
Right. And so, if it's fair to say, then, if somebody were to want to reach out to you and have a conversation about filling one of these gaps that help protect our warfighters, it's going to be critical for them to understand that FedRAMP and that authorization it's the starting blocks for you. You can't go any further if you don't have that or understand what that means.
Right. Exactly. You have to understand the customer before you can work with the customer.
Sure, absolutely. And then on the staff aug side, it's really cleared personnel, having that and understanding what that is. And if you are going to bring people to the party, that those
Hmm.
are going to have to be cleared. And that's really the only way that you can leverage that type of a resource as well. So,
Exactly.
well, Carly, this has been fantastic. It's been a real eye-opening, lots of new stuff for even me. So thank you for that. I
You're
appreciate it.
welcome.
And I want to thank you again and hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining me.